Okay, Chair, we're good to go.
Okay, thank you members and good morning. We do have a quorum and I now call the 50th meeting of the Committee for Communities to order and welcome all of you this morning. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery there for anyone wanting to connect the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs may be taken. May I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices. Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and please be aware of cameras and sensitivity of microphones throughout the course of the meeting. So members will move to agenda item 1, which is declaration of interest, and I'd remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. So members, I would like to declare today in particular that I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee and also that I'm working on a member's bill on mitigating the threat of homelessness. Any interest in from members? Yeah.
I'm a member of the deaf community.
Hello.
I am putting forward a private member's bill on gambling and lottery funding, which is 0.9.
Thank you, Sean. And
Trustee, Chair.
yeah, thank you, Brian, and everybody else.
Oh, I'm a charity trustee as well then. Yeah, thank you.
As am I a charity trustee too. Thank you, Andy.
Chair members as well.
Yeah, thank you, Morris. Okay, everyone, thank you for that. So moving on then to apologies. We do have an apology this morning from Melissa McHugh. Do members aware of any apologies? No? Clerk?
No.
Okay, thank you. And we are joined by Nicola Brogan, our Deputy Chair, on Zoom. Okay, members, Chair's business then. First of all, I can confirm that following sign-off by both the Equality and Social Justice Committee in Cardiff and the Social Justice and Social Security Committee in Edinburgh, the joint letter regarding the Pathways to Work Green Paper was sent to the Secretary of State yesterday. On Tuesday, more than 100 Labour MPs supported a reasoned amendment, giving reasons why the Universal Credit and Personal Independence Payment Bill should be rejected. Reasons include a lack of consultation and inadequate impact assessments. If accepted by the Speaker, the bill's progress will be halted. Coincidentally, the Minister, Stephen Timms MP, was before the DWP Committee yesterday, also talking about the bill. We will, I'm sure, continue to follow the bill's progress closely. I would like to thank my fellow chairs in those other committees and members of the other committees for their prompt consideration of our proposed letter. Thanks also to members for formally agreeing the wording of the press release so speedily yesterday. That was greatly appreciated. I'd also like to thank the Clerk and his team for what has been a significant and a very important piece of work around all of that, so I want to extend that thanks on our behalf. And a copy of the letter as sent is in your table papers there at page 3. Thank you. This is Members Deaf Blind Awareness Week, which aims to highlight the unique challenges faced by people who are both deaf and blind, as well as the remarkable resilience of this community. And I can attest that, having known people that were in that situation. Really, really difficult. Committee staff have been in contact with Deaf Blind UK and since regarding a small bespoke focus group for deaf blind people and their families and carers. It's planned for this to take place in autumn, which will ensure that the views of deaf blind people are received as part of our scrutiny on the Sign Languages Bill. Also, members, last night it was announced that the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman has launched an investigation into the Housing Executive. It is too early, really, to say more at this stage, but the investigation will end with the report being led in the Assembly, and we will, of course, maintain an ongoing interest in relation to that issue. And I was extremely, I suppose, well, first of all, just to say that the Minister has this morning issued a written statement in relation to a proposed NI Community Infrastructure Fund. So just to say that is something that I suspect members will want to keep look at and get a briefing on at the earliest possible opportunity. Members be content with that.
Agreed.
Yeah. And finally then for chairs, finally, I was very pleased to hear that Jason Smith, the legendary Paralympian, has been honoured in Eglinton with a new welcome sign to the village. I think that goes on top of a gold postbox, if I'm right. Is that the case? I think. But anyway, Jason was unbeaten in a 17-year career and won sprint doubles in the 100 metre and 200 metre at Beijing in 2008 and London in 2012. This is another significant milestone in the recognition of para sports, and very well deserved. I have to say, I've watched his career with admiration for a very long time. And lastly, members, then please just can I confirm that the content of the committee's arts sector report is agreed and can be sent to the Minister if members are content? Yeah, thank you, members. Okay, members. Agenda item 4 then, draft minutes. So the minutes from the meeting on the 19th of June are at page 7. Are members content to agree the minutes of 19th June as drafted? Thank you, members. Matters arising, members, then, you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 17. With regard to 5.4, the team have drafted an update on inquiries the committee has recently made to councils regarding planning and anti-poverty strategies and initiatives. I propose forwarding this with members' agreement to PAC, given the planned inquiry into child poverty that they have taken. Yeah, thank you. Members, can I ask if there are any other comments or issues you wish to draw out or seek briefings or comment to in relation to 5.2 to 5.4? Ciarán?
Yeah, just 5.2, the child risk assessment, so the CREAs. I suppose the question I have is just around, it's the second last paragraph. No child rights impact assessments were deemed necessary with regards to the department's 24-25 budget allocation process and final decisions. I'm just wondering why. You know, I mean, I would be under the kind of the belief that no matter what decisions are being made, particularly within this department, there will be some impact and some ripple effect to the lives of children. And I'm just wondering what justification our department has really in not doing CREAs on the budget. Just as we're moving forward, I think the recommendation is that all departments start to engage in that child risk impact assessment process, and it links very much into, I suppose, the UNCRC and the rights of the child, and making sure that children are centred in a lot of our departmental decisions. So I'm just wondering, it could be something that we can bring up potentially with the Minister next week, but it's just really to put on record that I think, particularly when it comes to a budget, I think that a CREA is now, it should be alongside an EQIA, just as standard.
Thank you, Ciarán. Yep. As on the record. Kelly and then Brian.
Yeah, can I ask that we get either a written or an in-person presentation on the process of EQIAs from the department, please? As far as I'm aware, when an equality impact assessment is part of the process, is that they identify what will negatively impact any of the Section 75 groups, and then are supposed to look at the mitigations that would remove any negative impacts. But all we ever get is it's either negative or it doesn't have a negative impact. Where it says that, you know, there were negative impacts, what were the mitigations? What was considered? Why were they ruled out? Is it because of cost or because of resources or what? So I'd like to just get down into that. For many years, MLAs and others have said that the equality impact assessment is all one-sided and never tells you the good stories of what a department has done to mitigate against negativity or detrimental impacts to people. So it would be very good to have a detailed presentation from the department on how they do their process and why we don't receive a full copy of the equality impact assessment showing all of the levels that they have had to go through to reach their final conclusion.
May I suggest that we write in the first instance and ask for the details and whether they are, what the publication regime is and how they are accessible or not, and then members can make a decision following that on whether they need a further briefing.
Well, I was thinking, should we ask for the detail in relation to this budget one to tie in with Ciarán's question, ask for the detail in relation to that as well, just as an example.
Because, Chair, just to highlight, for instance, we know that our Minister didn't get enough capital money to build the 2,000 targeted homes. That will have an impact on children. There's nearly 5,000 sitting in temporary accommodation. It will impact on older people, impact on people with disabilities. So I can't really understand. It should never be used as everybody's negatively impacted. That's not an equality impact assessment.
Ministers or members content with that proposal so far, and then coming to Brian.
Well, it's under 5.4.
Yeah.
Are you happy to take that now?
Yeah, if members are content with 5.2 there, we'll move on to 5.4, yeah.
Just in the response there on planning applications, processing time, I am disappointed there hasn't been a response from Belfast City Council. So just and I thank James and colleague for compiling the report there, the summary for us. But if we could continue to seek one, maybe we could go back to Belfast City Council. Obviously, it's a particular concern for representatives in that area, in that council area, including myself and Andy, I'm sure. So if we could go back again, just rather than leave that as a gap.
Kelly?
We actually get clarification on. It's good to see that there are a couple of councils that are meeting targets or showing improvement. So we'll start off with those guys first, thank goodness. As Brian has said, there are a number of councils that haven't responded to us. There are ones that have admitted not meeting targets, and then nothing from others. But who are those councils accountable to if they don't meet the targets? Is that finance or infrastructure? If we could just clarify that, and then to ask that relevant minister what the monitoring and sort of the measuring mechanism is, and what do they ever contact a planning department to say you're missing targets? What is the penalty? I don't think there are any penalties for councils for missing planning targets. It's just if we need development for housing and to support the minister's housing strategy, then we can't really have planning falling behind. So if we could maybe determine which department, finance or infrastructure, are taking the lead on that, and how they monitor, and what the penalties, if any, are made, or what contacts are made with councils to get them to hurry up.
Yeah, members agreed with that proposal? Yeah, thank you.
And Chair, sorry, earlier you'd mentioned about the anti-poverty strategies, of course, being sent to PAC, but I was just wondering if we should write to the department to ask if the council's anti-poverty work is aligned with the anti-poverty strategies' intentions. Is it doing enough? Is it not doing enough? Is it directed in the right way? And how the department will be working with those councils to ensure, because we know that some don't have an anti-poverty strategy, so how are they working in partnership with our minister to deliver on those targets?
Yeah, so they're both working in the same direction. Yeah, I think
sorry, Chair. Just while PAC have an investigation inquiry into the subject, we maybe just need to bide our time on that one if members are content.
Okay.
I just thought it might be worthwhile asking the minister in advance of a multi-year budget, you see, if councils are saying that they need more help. But if PAC are doing their thing, I suppose we'll have to wait now. Goodness knows when they might come out with that.
Yeah, well, we will keep an eye on it. It is something and please do come back on that, Kelly. We will keep an eye on that, I think.
The committee can write to PAC and just raise that as an observation.
That would be helpful.
And then maybe phase that. Yeah. Okay. Members content with that? Okay, members, moving on then to agenda item 6, which is correspondence. And just to check, members are otherwise content with the memo as provided there in your packs on matters arising. Yep, thank you. And agenda item 6, correspondence, the memo for which is at page 38. Just to note that 6.5 was brought to our attention by Kelly following the briefing last week on intermediate rent from the department. So that's in the correspondence for you there. Can I also ask, I'm moving then to items 6.2 to 6.6, and anything within that section that members wish to raise? Go ahead, Kelly.
It was just on that 6.5, could we write to the minister? We know that the Private Tenancies Act is through, and there are a number of pieces on notice periods and so on. It just, if we can get a timeline of when the minister will be bringing that forward.
Yeah. Members content with that?
Just a query on the same subject, and that's well, I can't speak for any other region, but Causey Coast and Glen 725 average rent, it's actually around 8,500-900 now. So that, even in this short space of time, the data's out of date. So if we could maybe have some way of having it updated to properly reflect the rents out there at the minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Members content with those, and Brian?
Yep. On that 6.5, yeah, that Ulster University report on the private rental market, it's a very helpful report, looking through it. Just to comment and pick out a few I don't know whether we get a briefing on it from them at some stage. I know we're quite busy, but it is a key sector, and it's hard to get the same data, so it is a very helpful report. It does imply, or it shows there in charts, a long-term decline, which surprised me. Sometimes we think the private rented sector is ever growing, but it's showing a decline. And it shows that the most attractive type of properties for landlords are apartments and terraced townhouses, more so than semi-detached and detached. And again, that reinforces the idea that private rented sector is more so in apartments and lower value private housing, and then all the associated issues of private rented sector tend to be in lower value housing areas. So that it's not uniformly across society. Also, it does comment to, there is a concerning growth in rents, up 8.5% over a year, and in Belfast up 10.4% over the year period. And it comments that some improvement in supply across several rental locations and associated slowing in growth of average rents. So again, making the point that where there is supply, the rents increase will not be as sharp, but where there's a shortage of supply, the increase will be greater. I know we have need for more housing across all tenures and all types of housing. But if we had time at some stage, I would be interested to get a briefing from the Ulster University on this, if we can fit that in.
Members? Yeah. Yep, okay. Yep, we'll look into that. Andy?
Yeah, Chair, happy enough. Can I just declare an interest as a private sector landlord, please?
Yep. Yeah, and I will do the same, actually, at that point. Is right. Thank you, Andy. Also private sector property. Okay. Members, moving on then, I'm going to go then to 6.7 to 6.13, but just to say, I would want to ask, do members wish to request a department briefing on the Shaping Sustainable Places programme in the autumn, following that consultation at 6.8 there? Yes, Sean?
Actually on that point, I'm just wondering, I have a real issue with consultations that run over the summer, and especially ones that only run for 8 weeks. And I'm just wondering if we can ask why that was specifically chosen. To only run for 8 weeks, given obviously the recommendation is at least 12, and I just think that it's very difficult when you're putting something out the last week in June and you're closing it before the start of September. There's a lot of lowered capacity in particularly our community and voluntary sector over the summer months, both with holidays and with other issues. So I would just worry that we're eliminating some people who would respond to that consultation by having it shorter period and over the summer.
Yeah, and it is a bit, I suppose, strange in terms of juxtaposition with what the Minister done, which I consider the right thing to do in terms of the anti-poverty strategy, extend that for 14 weeks to make sure it didn't end over the... Would it be appropriate to ask if that could be extended, if the consultation could be extended?
I just think best practice, and I know it probably might not matter, who knows, but it's just the fact that we should be encouraging the department to follow best practice.
Members content we write to the department to seek a rationale, and are members content that we also raise the issue about whether they are considering extending it?
Just for clarity, then Chair will write requesting a briefing and then ask if there's any consideration, given the period of the consultation, that it be extended. Okay,
yep.
Thank you.
Maybe as a committee just ask that where or when there are consultations over a period of recess, that they're automatically extended by the department. Because summer recess is not a good one any time for them to do that. Yeah.
And it's important feedback to inform the context.
Especially what the context of what it's doing is really good, but it's grassroots community level work, and they're exactly the people who are under pressure during the summer months.
So it's specific to this briefing, but also in a more general sense, raising the concern and asking the department to consider that.
Okay.
6.10, Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Morris.
The continued expectancy on local councils to have regulation and enforcement, but the regulation and enforcement is at a cost to the council. It doesn't wash its face. And is there anything we could do to find out from local councils the powers that they have to actually make, if they find somebody for illegal use of the vapes, etc., for dog fouling and for things like that, there, the penalty actually washes its face.
Yeah, I think it's that's 6.11. Yep.
6.11. Sorry.
But your point is,
it's gone out of sync slightly on the.
yeah. So maybe I should have informed. So after 6.8, members, the corresponding memo is out of sync. So apologies, Morris. Right. It's out of sync with a list of correspondence on page 36 of the pack. Correspondence from the National Deaf Children's Society did not attach to the main pack, so it's been included in table papers. But how do members follow the pack more precisely, Clerk?
Using the list on page, was it 38?
Yeah,
please.
So the list on the page, on the actual table there.
Yeah, and that
so
would,
in this case, your item there is, I think, 6.11 single-use vapes amendment regs. Is that right, Morris? Yes. So, sorry.
Apologies. I'm reading off the index.
Yeah. So what, can you just repeat your concern and your query, Morris?
That the councils are expected to produce more regulation and more enforcement, but the enforcement and regulation comes at a cost to the ratepayer, and it doesn't wash its face. So we need to, anyway, find out how penalties for people who break the law under the local acts can be penalised to an extent that it actually doesn't cost the council or the ratepayer anything in that particular council area.
Yeah, members consent.
Yeah, that might be a letter maybe for SOLAS or the umbrella body for the councils, if members are content.
Yeah,
rather than each.
That was maybe Nilga as well.
Yes.
And also just to let you know that in relation to 6.11 and 6.12 have both been sent to a number of committees, and the Committee for the Economy has agreed to coordinate a possible response or action. So just to let members know that. Kelly?
Just on that 6.12, it's a general point that has just sort of come out from this. UK Shared Prosperity Fund, it would be useful having an update from the Minister on the discussions about the future of what funding may be available, and if at long last our Department for Communities can have control to prioritise the spend for Northern Ireland purposes, because they know what Northern Ireland needs, and some of the programmes that came forward the last time weren't Northern Ireland specific and were very generic. So it would maybe be useful just as an outcome of this, where they talk about the complex needs post-16, for an update, because UK Shared Prosperity Fund funds quite a lot of that activity. So if we could maybe get an update from the Minister.
Yeah, and we could flag that to the Minister for next week as well. But you also want to
You might not even have it next week because of all the stuff that's going on with the Treasury at the minute, but...
Members content with the Clerk of you the detail of the proposal, and are members content?
So we'll write the letter asking for information regarding the extent or proposed extent of the department's control on that. Yeah, understood.
Sure. And an update on where they are with the negotiations. Yeah. But yeah, I imagine the Minister may well bring that up as part of budget discussions next week.
Okay, thank you, members. So, any other comments in relation to those 6.7 to 6.13, or members that are otherwise content with the memo? Yep. Thank you. Okay, members. So I now propose we take a short suspension to allow our interpreters to set up for the next agenda item, if members are agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. Take a short break there. Thank you. And we're coming out of broadcasting. Yes.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber.
Okay, Chair, we're good to go.
Okay, thank you, members, and we are resuming our now meeting at agenda item 7, which is a briefing by Action Deaf Youth on the Sign Language Bill. Members' papers for this agenda item start at page 259. I would now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we are joined this morning by Ali May, and Ali May is a deaf young person. You're very welcome, Ali May. Ali May's mum, Brona, is also joining us this morning, and you're also very welcome. We are, Gemma McMullan is joining us, and Gemma is the mother of a young deaf child, George, aged 26 months, I think, Gemma? Yeah. Is that correct? And Julie Graham, who is Director of Services with Briefing by Action Deaf Youth on the Action Deaf Youth. So you're all very, very welcome to Committee for Communities this morning, and thank you for your attendance here today. I understand, and members will know, that Gemma and Ali May are here to provide some lived experience evidence rather than particular legislative expertise, and that's hugely important to us, and thank you for that. I understand that Julie, I think, will make a brief opening statement on behalf of Action Deaf Youth before we move on to questions from members. So, Julie, if you're content, please go ahead, and then we'll come to questions. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We are absolutely thrilled to be here today to engage in this discussion around the Sign Language Bill. This is a momentous occasion for us, and we know that it was introduced in the New Decade, New Approach back in 2020. And over the past 5 years, we've now got to this stage. It's actually hard to believe that we've managed to get here halfway through the decade. Just amazing. First of all, can I express our very sincere appreciation to all those who have done all the hard work in the background to enable us to get here today, and especially to our local deaf community who have contributed a lot to this process, to the Sign Language Partnership Group, and also to the Department for Communities, who we do know have worked substantially in the background. For us, this bill represents a life-changing opportunity for those of us who live in Northern Ireland, and specifically for deaf children in Northern Ireland. And I am delighted to be here today to share our experience with yourselves in the committee. Speaking as the Director of Service Delivery and Development in ADY, you can see that I am deaf myself, but I'm very pleased to have alongside me today Ellie May as a young person and two other parents who I am going to let introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Gemma McMullan. My son's name is George, and he is 26 months, not very old. He is moderately deaf, and he was identified as deaf when he was 8 weeks old. He is moderately deaf, and we have been learning sign language and been signing with George since he was 5 months old. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you. Hiya, my name is Ellie May O'Connell. My sign name is this, because of my curly hair. I'm 13, and I go to school in Victoria College. It is a mainstream school. I'm profoundly deaf, and I have been using BSL from I was very small. Hello. My name is Brona O'Connell, same as Ellie May. This is my daughter. Ellie May is my daughter. I'm her mum. Ellie May was diagnosed deaf when she was 2. When she was 4, we started to attend Action Deaf Youth. And that's when we started our journey with BSL and total communication for Ellie May. I have studied BSL up to level 4. And now that is the equivalent of a HNC or level 4 NVQ. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brona. Thank you, Ellie May, or should I say... And you're really particularly welcome here today. I have to say, I think we as an institution really benefit from having young people's voices and experiences. And I know that you have had your own unique journey and your own experience with sign language, and it would be really useful and helpful if you could share some of that experience that you have seen with sign language throughout your life, and in particular when you moved into grammar school. What are your thoughts in terms of sign languages? How has it changed, and what would you like to see happening in the future?
I've been signing has been really helpful for me to communicate with people, and it's just amazing to have another language that I can understand. And when I don't want to talk or not wear my cochlear implants, I can just sign and just talk to my family. And if I want to have like private conversation with my mum, I could just sign without anyone knowing. In school, I have a classroom assistant who is also deaf, and I'm very pleased to have a deaf assistant who actually understands what you're going through as a deaf girl in a mainstream school, surrounded with all the hearing people. And it's really easy for me to talk to my assistant when there is a problem what's happening in school or home. I could just talk to her, and she can help me how to solve all my problems. And it's just amazing that what she's done for me for the past 2 years, all the work she's done to help me to do my work in school, and I'm just very pleased about it.
Thank you. And I should warn you, we have all done some sign language lessons, so be careful, we might understand. I think you're safe enough, to be honest. I don't think we've quite got there. But thank you for that. One quick last one for you, Ellie May, just from me is, so you've got that support in school, in broader society, out at shops, out socialising, what challenges do you see, and how might things improve to make sure that those challenges are removed in the future?
I don't understand your
So,
question.
do you find difficulty, say, so in your school, people probably are very aware that you have that you are deaf. When you go into shops and things like that, do you find it more difficult? Do you find that there's a lack of understanding around your needs because it's not visible? It's not something that people know.
In shopping, it's not really difficult for me because, well, it just depends. Because if there's a music background, it's very difficult for me to hear my parents when they're talking, or like the bridge sound is very difficult. But I do hear them a bit better, and I also my mum does sign language when there's a music background or I don't understand what is her questions.
Okay. Thank you, Carol May. Thank you, and I'll go to Julie and then I'll come to members. So, Julie, I suppose we've heard before about the importance of those early years and how those years are so crucial around language learning and the risks around language deprivation. Let's Play and Grow is clearly working hard to fill this space. I wonder, is it your belief that legislation or societal awareness or a combination of both are the best way to ensure the widest possible support for young people, or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I would agree that currently in society there is generally more awareness happening now, but we all know that for every child, early language acquisition is crucial. And the key stage of development is that stage from birth up to 5 years old. And there is very clear research showing that for deaf children, it's actually 0 to 3 years old. Those first 3 years of life are absolutely crucial in that child's development. And research would indicate that if a deaf child has access to sign language in those very early years, up until they're 3 years old, it doesn't matter what they do later on in terms of acquiring speech or not acquiring speech. It's the initial access to language in those first 3 years of life, and specifically sign language, that has the biggest impact on their later development. And that is what influences most their later trajectory through life. That is that early language acquisition, which goes on to affect literacy, their reduced incidence of mental health, educational outcomes are better, employment opportunities then related to educational opportunities, and that is what creates the best outcome. It's that first 3 years of life, and that's why as an organisation we've worked really hard on developing those structures to put those services in with very young children, because that's where the biggest impact can happen and does happen, and that's now evidenced through research. So, my response to your question will be that the bill has the potential to create a better focus on these early years, because if we can change the experience in those early years, we change the trajectory of them as children, as young people, and on into their adult life. And so in my briefing paper, you'll have noted that I did give you some suggestions already of what we would like to see. I'm sure you've had the opportunity to explore that already. And I think that's what we would be looking for in relation to the early years provision.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Okay, I will now go to members. So at this point, I have Kelly, Brian and Morris, then Sean. So Kelly, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Gemma, could I ask you first? You're learning sign language to be able to communicate with your son and to help him. What's the access like at the moment for sign language for the wider family?
So, in terms of ourselves as a family unit, it's me, George and his dad, Dean. Whenever we were told that George was deaf, we were given the option that hearing aids were the first and foremost thing that he was going to get. There was no mention of sign language as an option. It was, this is how we're going to fix George's hearing problem, and we were sort of sent home with no guidance, no charities, no leaflets, nothing. In terms of the wider circle, there is basically nothing. You know, we've been teaching our families the sign language. ADY do offer sign language for grandparents, which in my opinion is the only sort of access that they're going to get is through this charity. But for us as parents, we were given no guidance, no support in terms of sign language at all. There wasn't an alternative language. It was, you will get hearing aids for George and that will fix his hearing and he will go and live a life without any sign language, which we are hoping that this bill is going to change.
So do we. I think that hearing from yourselves and people with lived experience confirms that element of the bill where we ensure that training is available for family is key. But I think you've highlighted something that others have raised with us, is that within the health system, there isn't an automatic recognition that sign language as communication is as valuable as every other support mechanism. So the bill doesn't currently require sign language to be introduced at diagnosis. So perhaps that's something we can take forward. I would like to turn now to Ellie May. Thank you so much for today. Can I ask you, going through mainstream school with an interpreter has been a wonderful experience for you, but what happens when your interpreter has to go on holiday or is not well? Is there a replacement person that you can call upon, or how does that work?
So in my school we have two classroom assistants who knows sign language, BSL, but so one of them is hearing, and of course my classroom assistant is deaf, she knows BSL. So when my assistant is on the way on holiday, I have on that classroom assistant, that Pacific, because one of the man in my school who is in charge of all classroom assistant, he will organise and make sure that I have a good classroom assistant who is not like don't know sign language but don't know about how, and they're aware of deaf people. So I have her and she is just really good, and so when my assistant is ill, so it just depends on what days. So maybe some day it's only for one day. I think I would be like fine. It depends what the subjects I have in my classes. But if I have a difficult day for all my subjects, I would have her to help me with all my work and making sure that I'm having the good support.
And can I ask, in your school, is there any classes or anything provided so that all of your friends or other teachers are learning sign language?
Well, when my assistant is talking to other people in my class, she is trying to teach my class to learn sign language, but it's very difficult for them because they would forget, and they don't, and it's very difficult for me to communicate because they don't know what to do, because even though they have deaf awareness, but they just don't know. They might be a little bit shy and they don't know if they're going to say the right words or the wrong words. But it is, but I just really want them to learn sign language, and also some of my teachers just the basics. So then, they can communicate with me. But I just really want that in my school. But I just really want it.
When you're travelling to and from school, do you get a bus?
No, because I live close there, so I walk.
Lucky you. Or maybe not lucky you, because then you can't be late. I'm just, actually, if I could come to you, Brona, as a parent, when your child's diagnosed, you want the best possible. Can you advise us as a parent, has there been anything that has really surprised you and taken you aback about the life of a young person who has hearing impairments or who's deaf, that really has shocked you, that needs to be improved, that we should be thinking about?
Well, Ellie had a late diagnosis, so she wasn't diagnosed until she was 2. So she really, as Julie has talked about, that language deficit between 0 to 3, Ellie had 2 years without language. And thinking back on it, we were very lucky about who we met along our way, who signposted various organisations and things that we could have met up with. And we had initially a teacher of the deaf who was all for total communication, which was using sign and voice at the same time. And I think that is what saved us. Whereas, anecdotally, from speaking to other parents, as Gemma said, that was never signposted to them. It was just, everything was to be oral. I think without sign language and having that ability to start signing with Ellie whenever she was 2 and very basic, that really did start our communication, because beforehand we couldn't communicate with Ellie because we didn't know that she was profoundly deaf. And to see her develop so quickly with the sign language was amazing. And we had a lot of people that said, don't sign, don't speak at the same time because it's not going to work. But with the sign, she was able to attach language, and her language then, spoken language, improved. I would say her sign language is still better than her spoken language, especially written. But it means that there was an avenue of true communication with us. And it wasn't then when we went to Action Deaf Youth, from she was 4, and I had the opportunity to learn alongside her, that she really blossomed. We did have the opportunity again for the BDA to come in to do home sign language with us, and we had the parents there and her 2 brothers and my husband. But it was a 6-week course. It wasn't tailored to a child's needs. It was like, what do you want to learn? Well, I don't know, I want to learn everything. So, although the idea was very good, it could have been more structured. And I think then going into Action Deaf Youth and learning sign which pertained to a young person and helping me to help her acquire language, with the big picture books, and this is a shirt and this is and how a 2-year-old, whatever, would learn their language. At 4, she was doing that, and she was attaching a language to sign, and that has continued on through her life, and that's why she still has a sign-in communication support worker in school. I think what has been the most shocking thing for me is, a most fearful thing I think is for me, is knowing how bright and how my daughter is, and I do feel that within mainstream education, she will not have the same access to her as her peers. And statistics show that deaf young people will perform worse at their GCSEs, etc. And it's having to advocate for her all the time. You do advocate for your child anyway, but you have to advocate in a more stringent way, I suppose. And it's that extra work we always have to do at home to make sure that she's catching up. Her school journey is much harder with regard to pertaining and getting her qualifications. And I know that she can be anything and anybody she wants. And I've learned that then through going to Action Deaf Youth and all the role models, deaf role models that she has had in and around her. And as well, her social struggles with friendship groups and things. And I know that young people will always have that difficulty as they grow up, but I do think it's harder for her. And again, it's that deaf awareness and that ability for true communication. And I think if you had the sign language bill coming in and you had that strong foundation for young people at the beginning, with language acquisition, that will help their life chances, and also be a benefit for community as a whole, where people feel included and there is true inclusion, is I suppose what I'm trying to say.
I have one final question, and it's for Julie. Julie, I have a massive concern that the bill comes forward, but we don't have enough interpreters available to deliver all of the needs and to meet the needs for people who need interpreters whether that be in health or education or travel, whatever. How long do you think it will take Northern Ireland to upskill enough interpreters to make the bill worthwhile?
Okay, I believe in clause 10 it addresses this area in terms of accreditation and increasing the pool of sign language interpreters and sign language teachers. So I know it is within the bill. I would suggest that within clause 3 and 4 of the bill that does address this. It talks about prescribed organisations, and we are assuming that they are public services. And I assume that education will be within those prescribed bodies. ADY feel, though, that education is crucial for our deaf children and young people, and that needs to be highlighted more. There needs to be a focus on that, and it needs to be referenced much more strongly. Because that will transform deaf children's lives. There will be better educational opportunities and outcomes with that, and therefore that will change everything than just bringing in more interpreters. So we really do need to go back to the foundational structures that are in place to address these. So I have put forward some suggestions about what could be the start of a journey. One example here is that in Northern Ireland we are quite different from the rest of the UK, because we already have a structure and a model of an Irish-speaking medium school. So we have that model, we have that structure in place, and we know what that looks like. Potentially long-term, could we look at a similar structure and a similar model and use that as a sign language school? That is an option. That's more long-term. I do appreciate that. And we do appreciate this is the start of a journey, and we don't expect things to be changed instantly. But I would reinforce the need to address education, because the likes of George and Ellie May, it will then go on to give them more choices. Hearing children have choice when it comes to education, and why do deaf children not have that same choice? So that would be my strong recommendation to answer that question.
And just on that, the types of qualification for sign language teachers will be based on regulation, and there's no timescale for the regulation in the Act. Do you think that we should perhaps ask for a timescale for that? For the regulation to be made?
Timescales are useful, of course they are. Now, I'm not from a legal background, so I don't understand necessarily the procedures around this, but I would trust that the Assembly and DFC would probably know how that would work out best. Definitely timescales would be useful to have in place.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly and Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your attendance today, and all who are here with you. And thank you, Julie, for your briefing paper. Our purpose is to examine the wording in the bill, and it is helpful that you have set out specific suggestions and recommendations whereby we can seek to change and improve the wording in the bill. Thank you also, Gemma, for your personal testimony in the papers that we have received. And Ellie May, you're a great example of total communication that we hear others talking about. I wanted to ask, one of the comments, Julie, in your paper is that many deaf adults wish they had attended a deaf school, but you say 77% attend mainstream school. When we've asked this question before, we've always been told ultimately it is a matter of that there should be a choice, and I'm interested, Ellie May, is that something you considered? And well, both of you, Julie and Ellie May, just for a bit more for your thoughts on that, when young people and families are weighing up that choice. Is there enough provision for both in mainstream schools and in specialist deaf schools? Is it only Jordanstown in Northern Ireland, or how many specialist schools are there in Northern Ireland? Just the one?
Just the one.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Ellie Mae? Okay. As a deaf person, I will be sharing a bit of my life experience here as well. I became deaf at 7. I got meningitis and became deaf. I at first went to a mainstream school that had a deaf unit. I'm sure you've heard of mainstream schools, PHUs. So it had a deaf unit down in Bangor. The unit is now closed down, but that is where I initially started my education until primary 7. After that, then, when considering secondary school, I did visit various schools here, but I wanted to go to a deaf school. So I then went to England, because there's a deaf grammar school in England which boards deaf students. So I had that choice then, and that's the choice I made. But now Ellie Mae has been on a very different journey from mine. So Ellie Mae, do you want to talk about how you made that decision to go to Victoria?
So first I went to St. Bride's, which was a really good school. They had amazing accessibility for me to enjoy my life in primary school. And so I went to St. Bride's from nursery all the way to P7. And then when I finished that, I went to see other schools, because I didn't do the transfer test, but I did the practice one, but not the actual one. And there's 2 schools that we accept my scores. And then I got into Victoria College, Belfast. Victoria is a good school. All schools have good schools for me. But St. Bride's and Victoria, they're an amazing way to help for me to enjoy my life in school and picking the right subjects for me to actually understand, and I'm not like confused and taking a step back and not enjoying my life. So then, but I would like them to maybe make more, they encourage more people to come and learn sign language, and maybe make it a club for them to learn. So then when they're meeting with deaf people, like maybe in with their friends, in their friend group in a different school, or in outside at home or wherever, and they can practice and learn. And then it'd be really good for me. So then, when I'm not wearing my cochlear implants or whatever, I can communicate with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's helpful to hear 2 different approaches, and that it's up. The choice should be provided. You know, that is what we have heard. I want to just refer to, Julie, some of your comments. In clause 2.2b, where in the bill it talks about arranging availability of classes for deaf children and their close families, guardians and carers to learn or have proficiency in the language. We've heard from others that of the importance of that early opportunity as soon as possible, and some have talked about a reluctance to teach sign language from some adults who think it might discourage spoken language. We have commented before that there needs to be stronger wording there to ensure that the availability of of sign language is not delayed and is available at the earliest opportunity. And in clause 5, I think we are all dissatisfied with the consultation, where it talks about any future changes and regulations. The department must consult with one person or one group appearing to act on behalf of the deaf community, or at least one person or one group. So we have wondered how that could be improved, that wording. So you refer to a sign language partnership group or the establishment of a national advisory group, as in GB, I think. So whether you want to comment on either of those matters, how we could improve who should be involved in the consultation. It seems too weak to just say one person or one group. So how could that wording be improved?
Obviously, the wording on the bill as it stands, I mean, I can't comment on how you do that from a legal perspective, but what I would say is we need to look at what our goal is around this. Our goal is that we create a piece of legislation that works in practice and that when it becomes law will transform the lives and the opportunities for deaf children and young people in Northern Ireland. That's what we're working towards. So whoever is being consulted should be people who themselves have experience and skills within this area. And for me, it's really important that deaf children and young people are included in that process. And I think that's what we need to see as the principle that we're aiming to achieve.
Okay, well, it's definitely an area that needs improvement, and we will seek to do that. And the last one I want to ask about, Chair, is in Clause 11, where it defines members of the deaf community. And the wording in the bill, to me, is really the sign language community, because the wording that is here, if you don't use sign, I know that this is a sign language bill, but effectively, if you don't use sign language, you're not included in the definition of the deaf community. And you make the point that it needs to make sure it includes deaf children and parents of deaf children. But I just think effectively, it needs to make sure that it includes everyone who would see themselves as part of the deaf community.
We would absolutely strongly advocate that Clause 11, which already specifies certain groups, should also incorporate ensuring that all deaf children and young people are represented. I mean, you've heard from Gemma, you've heard from Brona, that so often the access for deaf children to sign language depends on signposting, which is currently not being given. And if you don't have signposting, then how do you access it if you don't have the information given to you? So again, that's not the bill's fault, but if you don't have that as a foundational point for deaf children at the point of diagnosis. So I think then every deaf child will be included, but we've got to ensure that this is inclusive of every deaf child and every family with a deaf person in it. And that maybe needs to be spelled out a little bit more clearly, because parents are part of this. Parents need to be empowered to feel that they are part of what's going on here, because language starts at home for every child. And families are a key part of that child's journey. And that's why we would advocate that there would be those amendments to bring in those 2 points.
Yeah, and it relates to the earlier point about the promotion of sign language, so that even people who have not yet taken up the opportunity should be recognised if they have deafness, that they are part of the deaf community, and should be always the encouragement to learn sign language. And you've made the point that the earlier that happens, the better, otherwise you have language deprivation. Okay, thank you. Unless anybody wants to add anything.
I maybe make a point about whenever you said about education. I think if you had the likes of the courses available, picking a school would probably be less frightening for a parent, because obviously ultimately it's you, it's not your child picking their primary school. So at the minute I have made the choice not to send George to pre-pre, because I know more than likely that they're not going to be able to communicate him using sign language. So I have put off sending him to that. And then even picking his nursery school, if I knew that there was going to be even a 6-week course available for his nursery teacher, I would feel a lot more calmer sending him to nursery and then on to primary school. If I knew that his teachers were going to have access to that, it would make me a lot calmer on what school I was going to be able to send him to. But the pressure of knowing that that's at the minute not an option, then it's putting that pressure on parents a lot more. Where are you going to send your child? Do you send them to a deaf unit because you know that they're going to have access to sign language, or do you send them to mainstream and hope that they're going to get a classroom assistant that can sign? Just wanted to add that in.
Okay.
And can I just add there, Ellie was talking about, her primary school and how great it was. I think it was her teacher of the deaf who really, I suppose, created like a little deaf hub. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 deaf children in her school. And her nursery school teacher taught herself sign, so that helped Ellie whenever she was in the nursery. And then throughout the school then there were the deaf children there, so there was always that support. You weren't the only one. And also then they invited Action Deaf Youth in to work with her class and teaching sign. I think you do it in Craigie Primary School, is that right? Or there's something similar, a 6 to 8 week course. So it was all, and it's talking about inclusion. So it was all inclusive. Everybody, felt that they were together, and there was no difference. I think when you go into secondary school, it becomes more stark because there's not that same. It's more rigid, as in with lessons and timetables, and there's not that same freedom as primary schools to invite people in. Ellie is the only deaf child in her school, and that is a lot of pressure for her to feel. She feels that she is an outsider sometimes, and she spoke about that before. And about choosing schools for, Julie said that she went to England. So as parents, we have to make that decision. Do we send our child away to a boarding school in England, or can we not keep her at home? And that is, so we've made the decision to keep her at home. It's always in the back of our heads, if she starts to underperform, do we need to make that decision? But why should we send our deaf children to England to be educated? Why can't they be educated here in Northern Ireland? Even if it was a boarding school, maybe up the road or whatever, where you could visit or have her home at the weekend. But if you're sending your child away, who else needs to do that for education? So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Morris?
Thank you very much, Ciarán. Thanks very much for your presentation. I've raised it here before that I believe that there should be something within the curriculum itself to educate non-deaf children sign language, so that they in turn can communicate with a deaf person who is at their primary school. And I emphasise primary school because children at that age, their brains are like a sponge. They'll take in that type of learning very, very quickly and help communicate. And it's a question really for Ellie. If you had some sort of sign language education within the primary school when you attended primary school, could that possibly have made your journey a more pleasant experience? If you'd have had children who can hear but could communicate through sign language with you, growing up with you through that primary setting until post-primary, perhaps some of them then going on to post-primary school with yourself? Hard one.
Yeah, it's a hard question. I just don't know how to answer it. If I would go to a hearing, because obviously I'm already in a hearing school, but if I would just go and have more deaf people into my school, I don't really mind what year they are, but just someone to hang out with, and they would understand, and I would communicate with them. But in Victoria now, I'm just feeling like I'm the only kid in there, and I just don't know how to manage it. But when in my primary school, it was really simple for me to actually, because I have a deaf girl in my the year below me, that I was able to hang out every day. If I could do that, I would be delighted. I just can communicate with someone, and they would understand what you're going through. With only deaf girl in your class for like the whole day, and you got no one else to actually hang out with. But in Victoria, it's just really difficult for me, and I just can't. It's really hard for me to manage it as a deaf girl in there, and it's just really hard for me. But if I would just encourage more people to come and maybe do assigning classes in my school, maybe doing lunches or whatever, with someone who will actually understand, and I will be able to have fun. I can just be myself. But when I'm along with the hearing people, it's very hard for me to be myself, and I can't manage it.
Yeah, which is probably why I think that there should be some sort of sign language education in the mainstream primary schools, that all children can learn it, and it would help socially those who have got a hearing impairment to communicate with those who don't. And it also might set the pathway for future interpreters as they grow up, and I do think it's crucial that we need to do something, and we need to do it in an educational setting, and it has to be at primary school. And that's just my thoughts, that if all people are growing up together, they can learn to communicate, even if it's only partially. It may help people like yourself, Ellie, and it may help others who can hear, understanding but a bit better the problems that those who can't hear encounter.
Sorry. Could I just come in? I think really what Ellie's emphasising here very well is the important, it's not just about other people being able to sign, it's about deaf children and deaf young people being with other deaf children and deaf young people, and having peers who are just like them. Everybody is as human. We all need to identify. We need to have people who we can identify with and people who are like us. And that's a really important point that Ellie May is reinforcing, and she's talking a lot about that. And I think that's probably Gemma's concern too for George growing up, not having deaf peers in the classroom.
Yeah, well, if we didn't go to Action Deaf Youth, I don't think we would have encountered another deaf child up to now. I know he's only 2, but in the last 2 years, we definitely wouldn't have encountered another deaf child. So it is nice to be part of that community. And I'll just give an example. Whenever we were at one of the play sessions, there was a girl who was refusing to wear hearing aids, and she seen a doll with hearing aids in, and she ended up keeping them in because she's seen the doll wearing the hearing aids. So it's just nice to be part of that community and being involved with other deaf young people.
That thing, I think if you can see it, you can be it, and seeing other people. And I have to say, Gemma, I was very struck with something you said right at the start of your evidence. We said about the medical system kind of were working to fix George, and I think that struck me as something where it's about valuing. It's about that very rich culture and very unique and worthwhile. That in itself has huge value, and that there's a lot to share there. So. And I have to say, Ellie May, you're doing more than well in terms of representing people with hearing difficulties. So,
Gerard, just brings to mind one of the many junior football teams I played for over the years. There was 2 neighbours, and one had hearing difficulties, and the other one hadn't. The chap that played the football hadn't taken any formal classes, but he had learned from his neighbour how to sign language, and they communicated very, very well. Actually, it was amazing to see him communicate so quickly, and that's where I'm coming from. He learnt that at a very young age, and I think it helps. Thanks for everything, Ellie May. I wish you well in the future.
Thank you, Morris and Ciarán.
Oh, hi, Ellie May. Hopefully I got that right. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming here today, and I think your class And I know that as a teenager, it's really tiring to just be a teenager, and you're carrying all of that at the same time. So, and also not many teenagers will be sitting in the Senate chamber of the Northern Ireland Assembly giving evidence to a committee. So you should be incredibly proud of yourself. My question, so hopefully I've got the sign right, and if I haven't, forgive me, but if you were a world leader, is that right? Maybe. For the day, what would you put in place to make it better for people like you? So if you,
I don't really understand your
question.
question.
If you got to change, if you were in charge of this, what would you put in place that would change tomorrow to make it better for deaf children? If you were in our position, what would you put in this bill?
I would just... It's a hard question. I don't really know how to answer it, but
Well, why don't
come back to you?
Yeah.
You have a wee thinking, I'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I would love to know what you would like to see us put in this bill that would have either made your life a bit easier as you're going through, and what would make your life a bit easier now. So I'd really love to hear that, but don't worry, I won't put you on the spot.
And if I may, Annie May, if an answer to that occurs, you can write back to us and give it to us in writing, the same as any of the other officials would be asked to do. So if you please
No
consider
pressure,
that.
no pressure. I just think that your voice is one of the most important voices that we can hear. Gemma, oh my goodness me, the fact that you learned sign language postpartum is just exceptional and incredible, and just shows, I suppose, when you have the mummy, the mummy bear comes in.
Fight for your children, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose what I'd just like to know, and it might not necessarily be something that we can put in this bill, but I think it's something that it would be really important to hear, what emotional support or what support kind of went around your family at the time of that diagnosis?
Probably crap, is it?
Okay, sorry.
No. Come back to me.
Okay, no problem. And again, I think it was something that the chair had said as well, the fact that that approach to this something to fix. And I think what's come really clearly, both from Ellie May and yourself, is that this is much more than a medical condition. This is an identity, and it's an entire holistic issue that I think I hope that we get reflected in this bill. Julie, I'll come to yourself, and hopefully I won't make anybody on the spot or get upset. But I suppose for me, how can we ensure that the voices of children and young people are meaningfully represented on something like the National Advisory Group or the Sign Language Partnership Group? So how do we make sure that they're at the heart of that?
I think that is something that does need to be considered. Because as you've seen today, adults talking on behalf of children isn't as good. And that's why ADY brought Ellie May here today. And brought parents here today as well. Because the bill is about empowering deaf sign language users to speak up for themselves, not have people talking on their behalf. And that's why I really wanted to make sure Ellie May was here today. We need to create some sort of a system so that their voices will have input throughout. And little deaf children also have a very strong voice that needs to be heard. Even our very young deaf children can contribute their views to the process. How we do it will obviously be very different. We need to be creative, but it's something that needs due thought. Because the deaf children who come to ADY, they can tell us what they want very clearly. George is only 2 and he can tell you what he wants. They all have their way of doing it, and those ways may be different, but we do need to find a way to capture those voices.
My background was a youth worker before I was an MLA, and it was about that, bringing young people to the table in a meaningful way. And I think when I think about what I experience as an MLA and the engagement we have with the voices of young people at the heart of our decisions, can sometimes be quite poor. And then when you add in an extra layer then of whether the young person is deaf or has lived experience of something, I think that's even more challenging. So I think that's a really, really key point, which is why I wanted to ask. You can absolutely write.
No, I think I'm ready. No, it was you probably read it in my blog post. Whenever we were told George was deaf, you just think of worry, guilt, whatever emotions you feel. But Julie sort of then, whenever I got in contact, she wrote, "Congratulations on your baby. You have to remember." Sorry.
Take your time, Gemma. No rush.
That their deafness doesn't define them, but we need to support them as best we can, and this bill really helped to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really and I'm really sorry.
But there was no emotional support, and to answer your question, apart from when we got in contact with the charity, there was no support in the hospital at all. The consultant was in and out in a minute to say, you know, you're going to be fitted for hearing aids, you know, all the best, goodbye, this is your baby, off you go. You know, there was no emotional support whatsoever from the consultants, especially. To hope that answered your question, but
no, it absolutely does. And I think for me it goes back to really showing the importance of the community and voluntary sector as well, in terms of filling those gaps and really offering that support. One last thing, Delma, please come back to us and write to us. The other thing is, I'm really jealous that you have a secret language with your mum that you can say things about. So that is a bit of a superpower, to be able to say things without everybody else knowing. But thank you so much, all of you.
Okay, well listen, thank you everyone, and any other questions, members? If not, I'll just thank all of you. And Julie, I want to say it's been very, very clear throughout the session, the work that you're doing to fill the gap that we are now trying to do with proper support, proper legislation, has been remarkable, and thank you for holding that. Go ahead.
Would you mind, Chair, if I just ask?
Go ahead.
I'm interested, Ellie, May, to ask you, your spoken English is very good, and you're able to hear through the cochlear implant, but are there circumstances, if you were relying on the cochlear implant, are there circumstances where that is difficult for you to communicate? I'm thinking maybe in group situations where lots of people are talking, and are there certain maybe circumstances in which you prefer to rely on sign language rather than using the implant and spoken word, that it makes it easier for you to communicate? In what situations would you prefer to use sign language rather than relying on spoken and the implant?
I really love the way when I don't have my cochlear implants on, or if my cochlear implants die and I don't have the batteries with me during school time, I would love the way that the teachers would maybe do the basic sign language, to say like, I'd be saying like, oh, my cochlear implants die, I don't have the battery with me. I would love the way when they can learn a little bit of signs, so then when they're talking, I'm not like concentrating on the lip reading, I'm more concentrating on the emotion, the face expression they're having, and the body movements and the way the hands are going. But I would love when they can maybe say like, I'd be saying like, oh, my cochlear implants are, then they can like maybe do a bit of signs, so, or write things on the board, so then I can make maybe draw some a little bit of pictures, so I'm like, oh right, I know what they're talking about. But when it's in the PowerPoints, they don't add any pictures, and I would just really want them to add pictures, because if there's a word that I don't understand, and if my classroom assistant is not in or at the back of the room, I'd be like, what's that word mean? And I don't understand. Then when I look at the picture, it would be making more sense, like, oh right, I know what they're talking about. But it's just very difficult for me, because I would just want them to know sign language, and I can understand a little bit more, and it'd be easy for me to communicate. And around group works, it'd be very difficult, because the background noise, everyone talking, and when we're going outside, it's still a little bit difficult. Still, my group would be still talking and over, but I would want them to talk, just talk one of them talk, and then they would talk one, and then they would face me, making more the lighting better and turn off the music and everything to make it more silent. But when it's come to that, they don't do it, and it's really difficult. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then if I'm asking something like, oh, what you're talking about. They would tell me what they're talking about, but not in a nicer way. They were talking in a rude way, and I just feel offended, and I feel like, oh, they don't want me to be included. And I just want them to be more open and knowing sign language, so that maybe me and my friend, we can have like a conversation without anyone knowing. Or, like, if I'm having a problem or something, I would just tell them. But if I don't have a problem, I'm like, what were you saying? What are you saying? And it's just really difficult, and I would love to wait just to do that.
Well, it's important to hear that the implant
And also
doesn't benefit every situation.
Yeah.
It's not the solution to enable your proper communication.
And also when people they're thinking, oh, cock implants can hear everything, they're not like, it's like you can hear again, but that's not it.
Yes.
I can hear, but not as well as a hearing person. I still have to like repeat or something, but I just don't like when people are just saying, like, turning their backs on me and talking, and then I'm like, then they're just saying, like, and then saying, like, when you can sign, when you're signing, then they're like, oh, you can, then why can you not hear? And then when you're like talking, you say like, oh, you can hear, but just that's not it. It's not because I just talk, as I do, but just annoying when people just say, no, they're not thinking the way as a deaf person or the deaf community where they're thinking of it, and it's just not right.
Okay, no, thank you.
Ellie was looking to come back in a brief final one.
Ellie May, I love you because when these are out, I don't hear it the same as everyone else, and the noise is dull, and nobody else understands that. So I get it, and thank you so much for bringing this up in committee, because it's very hard for me to explain to everyone what it's like living with moderate hearing loss and how tiring it is trying to read lips, hear people, understand the words, the noise, bad lighting, bad lip reading, all of that. So thank you for making that so real. And I'm going to have to put these back in now because I can't hear very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Daniel, briefly, please.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. A lot of the questions were covered. We are hugely in support of this bill, and it is so reassuring to hear how this is going to directly impact and benefit all of your lives. So we deeply appreciate you being with us today. Ellie May, can I say you're the most inspiring young person that I have ever met in my entire time as an elected representative. And you should be very proud of yourself. And your family should be very proud of you, because what you have done today is stand up for an entire generation and community who'll be very proud of the work that you're doing with the others on the panel. So thank you for that. Be proud of yourself for that, because I'm very inspired by you today. I'm very proud of you. And Gemma, the challenge of becoming a parent has its own demands and uncertainties. You have given voice, if I could say that, to so many people across our society, and offered a reassurance and hope that has not existed for a very long time. And you've sent a signal across all departments by this session today and through this bill, and all of us as advocates of this bill, that things are going to change. So thank you for your leadership. Indeed, Julie and Brona as well. This is one of the most interesting sessions that we've had. Deeply emotional. I could feel it in each of you. And many of us in society take for granted the things that we've been blessed with in life. We don't always appreciate the real challenges that exist in the lives of others. But I hope if this Assembly achieves anything, that we can have a very direct and positive benefit that will transform the lives of an entire community that in truth has been forgotten about for too long. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Daniel. And so, absolutely, as I was saying, Julie, the fact that you have been filling the gap, and organisations like yourselves, is remarkable, and hopefully the day of when people have to rely on that is coming to an end, and people can expect, as of right, to receive the supports. I also want to thank Gemma and Brona both for your advocacy and your, and that comes across very strongly and very clearly today, I have to say. And I think, Brona, as you said, that you have to be that bit more stringent to fight for your child, and that's something that you shouldn't have to do. As Ellie May says herself, and I think the word came across most strongly from you, Ellie May, for me, was inclusion, and the need and the right to be included. You have certainly been included here today in this committee, and you have brought the voice of all of your community into this room today in a very, very powerful way. And I do want to say this, and I mean this genuinely, your evidence here today in front of this committee has been remarkable in the sense of how confident you have been, how concise you have been, and how clear you have been. And I mean, when I say this, much more clear than many of the adults we have in this room who haven't had to deal with. So I really want to, and I'm sure, Brona, you're proud, I'm sure, every day, but you should be really proud today, and that has been a remarkable session, a remarkable insight into the needs, and a remarkable focus on us to ensure that this bill is as good as we can make it, so that at long last you start to receive the services you deserve as of right. But thank you for that very much today, and sincerely best wishes for the future from all of us. So if I could ask everyone just to stay where they are and maybe take us out of broadcast. We're going to have to take a short break again, members, to reset things. So if we could come out of broadcasting, please. If you could just wait there. Get it back.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Did I forward that thing to you? The letter? Bit of a... Okay.
Yep. Okay, thank you, members. So we're moving on then to agenda item 9, which is a departmental briefing on a regulatory framework for gambling. The briefing paper for this item is at page 567. And I now like to welcome the following department officials to the meeting. We have Gerard Murray, Gerard's Director of Local Government and Housing Regulation, Carol Reid, and Carol is Assistant Director of Local Government and Housing Regulation, Victoria Trimble, who's Grade 7 Social Policy Unit, Licensing and Gambling, and Ciarán Mee, who is Deputy Principal Social Policy Unit, Licensing and Gambling. I think you've all, or maybe certainly most of you, I think 3 certainly of you have been here with us before, and I'd like to thank you for attending. You are aware committee has maintained an interest around the gambling and the regulations and some concern around where we're at currently and where the trajectory is. So really looking forward to the session today. We have run over as a result of the earlier session. We've run slightly over time, so if I could ask you to be as brief and succinct as possible while getting the important information you have across to us, and then we'll go into members' questions. And again, I'll ask members to be as brief and succinct as possible. Yep. So thank you, Gerard.
Thank you, Chair, and committee for inviting us today. It's our pleasure to be here to provide evidence. I really wanted to be here to introduce myself in the new role, so I think some of you probably come across me in the previous role for urban regeneration and that, but I've taken over from the previous Director of Local Government there in December. And with me today, you've heard it, we'll have Carol, Victoria and Ciarán. You've probably met Carol and Ciarán before, but Victoria is also new to the team and is working with the guys on this area. So just to kind of so you're aware of my wider brief here, I also have responsibility for local government relations, and that's things like the partnership panel, community planning, PSC Solus, PermSec Solus group, and governance and administration for local government, so the policy and legislative framework for councils. And there are the other area is, of course, sponsorship of NILGOSC, the local government pension provider, and the local government staff commission. I also have housing regulation branch, which covers regulation of registered housing associations. The appeal service is currently sitting within my remit, and that's about 100 staff who administer about 9,000 appeals every year on a range of issues, including benefits. And then the social policy unit, who are here with me today, who look after gambling policy and regulation. of these areas, including entertainment, licensing, liquor licensing, pavement cafes and shops, Sunday trading. So I look forward to engaging with the committee on any of the areas within my brief.
You sound like a whole meeting on your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which slightly concerns me.
Yep.
I'm not going back any longer.
So as you'll know, the gambling regulation is devolved here, but there are elements of it that are both UK and GB legislation which have read across the NI. More importantly, the briefing today is about giving you guys the opportunity to ask some questions on that. We have provided a paper recently, and that will have addressed some of these areas as well. So look, Carol and Ciarán have also briefed the committee on a number of occasions, and this area is, I know we do say this often, is complex in terms of its policy and the legislative framework, so we're happy to try and provide clarity in any area that we can. And I'll just pass over to Carol, who's going to have an opening few remarks here, and then we'll open it up to questions after that briefly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I'll jump straight in. I think members, I suppose the elephant in the room is the future reform. So you will have received recently a scoping paper, and the department has now received a request for a briefing on that, so we can bring that forward and all the questions on that. So the technical detail on the current gambling law affecting Northern Ireland, including UK and GB law, is set out in the briefing note that was shared with the committee. That note provides detail on what constitutes gambling, so that includes activities at bookmakers, bingo halls, amusement and gaming centres and lotteries. It also provides detail on the authorities that are responsible for issuing and renewing licences, so the courts and councils for the most part, but in the case of licensed racetracks, that is the department itself. It covers the rules that licensed operators must follow and enforcement of the regime, which generally is by the PSNI and in some cases the Gambling Commission. And it also includes the sanctions then for the non-compliance with any of those pieces of legislation. The paper also provides detail on the protections available to Northern Ireland customers for both land-based and online operators. It provides detail on gambling advertising rules and on the National Lottery. So the existing Northern Ireland framework, the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Order 1985 was amended in 2022, and it's provided some additional powers and protections on top of what's already there. So the department is currently finalising Northern Ireland's first gambling code of practice, following the conclusion of that consultation on the 24th of December last year. 123 responses were received, and those are currently being analysed, and once that is complete and we put that to the Minister for agreement, we expect that the code will be published this calendar year. The 2022 Act also provided a power enabling the department to introduce an industry levy, and officials are currently exploring how this might be achieved. There's quite a lot that needs to be considered in that, including engagement with Department of Health in terms of how that money can actually be used. So as part of that, we're working quite closely with statisticians and the economists to address gaps in local gambling data. I know we've talked before about the difficulty that we've had in terms of trying to get HMRC Northern Ireland specific data. So the economists are looking at that for us, and then that'll give us all the necessary support and evidence that we need then to make an informed decision. As said earlier, we do recognise that there are concerns about the Northern Ireland law, particularly the lack of clarity in the 1985 order in relation to online gambling. So we're undertaking a number of work strands to help address that and to minimise the uncertainty. We've published guidance notes on the DFC website on different aspects of the order to assist those that are navigating the legislation. So the briefing paper does provide detail on what the department's understanding is, and we're in the interpretation here, I suppose, of the geographical extent of GB and UK legislation in terms of how it actually applies to Northern Ireland. We are seeking legal advice on that, and we're seeking the views of the Gambling Commission on that understanding as well. So in the meantime, there have been joint discussions ongoing with the Gambling Commission, the Advertising Standards Authority and the PSNI with a view to strengthening UK-wide cooperation and enforcement of the existing law. We're leading engagement with Department of Health, Department of Education and Department of Culture, Media and Sport in GB regarding the possibility as well of Northern Ireland benefiting from the GB levy in relation to the online aspect of that, and that was introduced in a response to the 2023 GB White Paper recommendations. So those various engagements, we believe that definitely will help us in identifying what gaps are there in those current protections, and then that will allow us to make a decision on what needs to be included, what we should be looking at in terms of future policy decisions. So we're happy enough to take any questions if you had an opportunity to consider the briefing paper.
Okay, thank you. I suppose one that I would like to ask is around the consultation on the gambling code of practice. Can you give us an update on the responses on that consultation, and when will the code of practice become effective?
Yes, so there were 123 responses to that consultation, and it has raised. They have raised issues that, in terms of due diligence, the department is now looking more closely at some of the aspects of it. Once we've completed that, we'll put it to Minister, and the expectation is that that can be done in this calendar year. Now, Ciarán, keep me right, I think we were talking about once it's published, there would then be 6 months for the industry to understand what their requirements are.
So they can prepare.
So they can prepare. So what sort of date had we agreed? We're hopeful for the 1st of January for it to actually come into effect.
Well, we haven't. I suppose it depends when the Minister will actually approve it, Carol. But we hope to have something with the Minister in the autumn anyway.
No, that's my part. There's a liquor licensing code of practice as well that we're considering in this side, and I think that's the 1st of January. So it will be as soon as practically possible. Once it's been confirmed by the Minister, then we would allow 6 months, just so that everybody understands what the requirements are.
And can you send us a report on the consultation at this stage? Have you that report drawn up?
I believe that has been sent.
The report on the consultation has not been.
Sorry,
we have a report on it, but I don't see why.
Yeah,
we can't.
Yeah.
We've done a report on it, but
okay, thank you. Yeah, that'll be useful to get that through. The other thing is, then, you have touched upon it there a fair bit around the gambling levy. Just, I suppose, how crucial is it that the North is included and introduces a similar levy, and also you've touched upon the online platforms, and that's extended to the North. What's your sense of how that's progressing?
Discussions are going well. I'll pass over to Ciarán in a moment. He's been engaged in those and leading in those. The discussions are going well. They have asked us for further information about how that money could be spent and what the need is for that, but that's really for Department of Health to lead on, because that money needs to be spent, I believe, by the Health Service. But say Ciarán has been leading in those discussions, so if you want to pick up
on the GB levy, the discussions have been fairly positive in the sense they haven't turned us down flat. There's an indication that we might be able to benefit from things like advertising and money going to that to promote a promotional activity around gambling harm, and some research. They do want to know more about some of the detail on the aspects of harm here, and also how they feel, how we would see including NI would benefit UK more widely. So we've been talking to Health and Education, and Department of Health is preparing a policy paper at the moment around gambling harm, and they're looking at levy in the context of that.
Okay, thank you, and we'll keep an eye on that. The final one for me then, before I come to Brian, is around the detail of the online gambling numbers and the cross-jurisdictional nature of it. I'm sure that adds to difficulties, but you talk of 35% of adults having purchased National Lottery tickets in the 12 months preceding the 2024 survey, and 18% had purchased National Lottery scratch cards or instant win games. So can you just clarify what we know about online participation numbers for National Lottery games and your sense of the scale of participation in the overall online options for people?
Can I also just clarify on the 18% who've done scratch cards or instant wins, that's inclusive of the National Lottery, but the way in which the survey was conducted means it's not possible to disaggregate what percentage of that just did National Lottery, so that's inclusive of. So in advance of today, we actually were speaking to our colleagues in ASD to try and sort of break down in a bit more detail what percentage of National Lottery is taking place online. So of the 23% of adults who you've referenced gamble online, 5% had only gambled in the National Lottery, and a further 4% had gambled on the National Lottery and at least one other type of online gambling. So of those 23%, we can say 9% have partaken in some way in the National Lottery online, whether that's exclusively National Lottery or the National Lottery and some other form of online gambling.
Thank you. Go to Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
Good, Chair. So, Ciarán, when you said with the GB levy, was that for online gambling?
We are pursuing it as for our levy. We are looking to GB about benefiting from that which is charged to the online. We're not looking for what they do on kind of the non-remote gambling. We accept that's very much, but particularly around the fact that
under the Licensing and Advertising Act, for example, the Gambling Commission can give an operator here or any operator the right, when they give them a licence, they can advertise UK-wide. So under that remit, we see an argument for us getting some benefiting from the levy for online. At least that's our argument.
Right. And you say there's discussion. What way did you word it that haven't turned us down? So
no, we've opened up
that?
discussions. We're facilitating the discussions, but because the GB levy is targeted at gambling harm, addiction, research, we wanted to bring in health and education. They'd be the primary beneficiaries of any money. So we facilitated the discussions between ourselves, DCMS, and health and education.
Okay.
And that's continuing.
But your paper says, well, the way it's worded here, the number of people who participate in gambling has fallen 80%, 67%, 7%, paragraph 6. But online gambling has risen from 6.7%, 15.8%, 23%. So that's where the growth is. And in terms of two thoughts on this. One is the decline of what I might consider less harmful, like bingo halls. There seems to be a decline of that type. But there's clearly that rise in online gambling. And there's also, have you any way of charting the rise of unregulated gambling sites, and people just run them through social media?
Right. Well, there's two things there. First of all, the gambling decline in participation is overall, whether it's online or non-remote. But there is within that, more people are gambling online.
Sorry, just to clarify, so that decline, does
decline
that
is
include the online?
The decline, yes, the decline is
Right.
overall. There's an overall decline in gambling participation amongst the adult population here, and that seems to have been a pattern since 2010. Whether it continues or not, you can't say, but that is the pattern. From 80% to 57% from 2024.
Okay, well, that's assuring. So I wasn't sure, was that just physical sites, but
it's
online was actually...
It's just the proportion that's increasing, the overall, there's an overall decline.
In relation to your question about this kind of illegal or... we don't have data on that. Part of our discussions, we're having discussions with the Gambling Commission, the police, and the Advertising Standards Authority about trying to develop a common approach, particularly around these new phenomena of online prize draws and prize competitions, so that we can, because they operate remotely, they can go into GB, some GB can come here. There's some can go down south. We've also raised it with colleagues in the GRAI, so that that's the kind. We don't have a sense deep data on the amount of it, but we're looking at the issue collectively.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
I suppose the last one then for me is around, so we have expressed our sort of concern that there's no legislation coming forward in this mandate.
Yep.
But we're also interested in what work is going on to ensure that in the next mandate we can hit the ground running, given the potential for harm, given the lack of regulation. Can you give us any update on what work is ongoing in terms of, are we moving to a stage where we're looking at potentially drafting something to have ready? Or
well, the guys will certainly give you a bit more detail on that in a minute, Chair. But yes, of course, what we need to do is to make sure whatever we're bringing forward is fit for purpose and it has the desired effect. And there are some areas that we need to explore in more detail before we could come to a conclusion or in terms of advice for the Minister on those policy decisions. But there are a number of areas, Carol, if you want to maybe mention them there, that we're looking at the minute.
Yeah, and I suppose, and it will be in the scoping paper, and we can talk about it further at the next session. The key thing, the biggest part and the most difficult part of a wider bill, a wider reform bill, would be online, if that's to be included. So the conversations that we're having now with DCMS, the legal advice that we're getting, are key before making a decision as to what a bill might look like. All of the work that we're doing now, we would class as policy development. So nobody's disputing the fact that a bill is needed. The legislation is so old, and a lot of clarity can be provided in a new sort of modernisation bill, whereas potentially a wider reform bill would be needed that would capture that online. So I'll let Vicky go through the work that has been ongoing and how we can use that. And I think we provided a table that actually set out, even in terms of the data that we're gathering, the specific policy areas that data will be really helpful for.
Yeah, so as I was referencing just what Ciarán's already said about working with the Gambling Commission, the Advertising Standards Authority and DCMS and the police to understand where the potential gaps are in relation to enforcement and controls. That's going to be very central to informing what the scope of a potential bill is. Again, the levy, so again extending the GB levy to Northern Ireland as far as that we've contributed, but our own levy and actually delivering that. The data collection, so data collection is ongoing as part of our general policy work, but it will also feed into each of these ancillary work strands as well, and to a potential bill. So in the scoping paper we've referenced not just what data we have access to, but what gaps that we're going to be trying to fill. The work on the levy, the Northern Ireland levy, is not just looking at in terms of both the gambling harms and how that can be used, as Ciarán's mentioned, working with DOE, DOH and DE in exploring that, but also the affordability, so working with our economists and statisticians to understand the profile of the industry as well, in terms of what a levy would actually look like in terms of affordability and economic viability. Sorry, did you?
I was just going to say there are obvious issues of scale to be considered in terms of some of the aspects of the wider framework in other jurisdictions. So there is a bit of work that we need to do to try and understand whether it's suitable.
Okay, well listen, I look forward to the future work on that, on the scoping and that, and I know we are going to be doing further work on that, so I appreciate that, Ciarán.
That's okay, Victoria answered my question that I had.
All right, thank you. Okay, listen, go ahead, Kelly.
Can I just ask, the betting, gaming, lotteries and amusements Northern Ireland order, I'm looking over, we've been through that. I'm just wondering, is there any reviews coming forward of the outcomes of that, of the first stages?
That was 2022. 2022. So that would be
in 2027.
Looking towards that in 2027. It's normally 5 years. So I know you worked with us on the liquor bill as well. That the first phase of that review is taking place earlier, but the reason why that's taking place earlier was due to an amendment. So that was 3 years, but general practice would be 5 years to allow it to embed. And particularly in terms of the fact that for many of those we were still feeling the result of COVID, really. So, an extra year is probably better. An extra year or 2 years above the 3 is probably better, just to get a real understanding of the impact.
I'm just wondering if the police are feeding anything through to you, because I had a few meetings with them over gaming machines as usual in chip shops and places where they shouldn't be, and the comment was, "Oh, are they not supposed to be there?" I was like, honestly, guys, this has been all over the news. No, it's just if there was anything like that gathered up, it would be useful for the evidence to see how that act is actually making a difference.
I mean, for both pieces of legislation, the PSNI are a key stakeholder. There's, we have to go to them, and they have their stats, so they will definitely be included.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, Grant, a little brief, please.
Oh, just hot off the press, I note that Stephanie Peacock, Minister for Sport, Media, Civil Labour and Youth, has just made a statement regarding prize draws, and that she's going to introducing a voluntary code for prize draw operators this year. So again, that's something relevant to earlier comments, to check that can apply, whether it will apply in Northern Ireland or whether we can seek to get it to. Probably wouldn't do in the first place. But yeah, also I think commenting on social lotteries, and implies that the government sees more value in the national lottery than in other society lotteries.
That's a whole other issue, isn't it? We'll obviously look at that if it's hot off the press. We haven't had a chance to consider what's been announced there, but we certainly will do.
Thanks for the updates, Ryan. We'll keep an eye on those with interest. Okay, listen, thank you very much, Gerard, Carol, Victoria and Ciarán, and good luck. We will continue to be engaged in this, so we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, folks. Any follow-ups there, members? members content for now. We'll be coming back obviously in another session. Okay, thanks members. Moving on, agenda item 10 is SL1, the Houses in Multiple Occupation Fees Amendment, NI Regulations 2025. A copy, members, of the SL1's page 576, and committee staff have distributed background material on HMO fees from the 2016 Enabling Act by email. These proposed regulations amend the maximum fee per person per annum the Council may charge for an application for a HMO licence. Do members have any comments, or are you content for the Department to proceed to make the rule? Yep. Kelly just got in first.
I was just going to say, I don't understand why it's £75. There isn't anything provided for us to establish why 75. I don't mind them putting it up, but why an arbitrary figure like 75?
Okay, Ciarán.
My issue was just around whether this would push people further from actually even registering. We have a really serious issue in Mid and East Antrim about the lack of registration. At this moment in time, there are 9 registered HMOs in Ballymena. That is not reflective of the true reality at all. And my worry is that you put that up to 75. Is that actually pushing? You know, is there then yet another reason for those landlords to not be registering, and therefore the health and safety issues and whatever not to be enforced? So I would really love, if possible, for us to maybe at some point get a briefing on HMOs, maybe get in Belfast City Council to talk about that with us. I think that would be really useful to look at those challenges. I know that obviously it'll be well into the next year, but I think that would be really useful.
In terms of this specific SL1, then will we ask the department just simply if they have some information on that, but rather than, if you like, preventing the process, but just in parallel with the process that members can take?
Yeah, so it's SL1, this is the stage at which we can kind of contribute. So for the department to and a sort of a rationale around the 75, and also a rationale as to what consideration has been given to that, Ciarán, that you're, so yeah, we can ask for their comments on that. It will come back to us as an SR, isn't that right?
Or just as well, and I didn't see it in the document provided, but what does that the entirety of that fee cover? You know, we have had problems highlighted with HMOs, so, you know, is that covering councils to deliver those services in relation to HMOs? I know not all HMOs are problematic, but where they are problematic, or is that being backfilled by councils' other services and ultimately ratepayer paying for that?
Well, we can ask them that. The enabling legislation details, will maybe send a little fuller email around just around that enabling legislation as well. But the 2016 legislation, it's that lists the purpose of fees, if that makes sense. So there's no suggestion in this that the purposes will change. It's purely the amount that's being charged for the same purposes. I'll engage with the department, but we'll also just circulate the 2016 enabling ledge maybe in full. If members are content.
Members content with that approach for now, but otherwise within all of that, members content for the department to proceed to make the rule. And we'll see where that takes us. Yes, thank you. Agenda item 11 then is Police Service of Northern Ireland Retention and Disposal Schedule, a copy of which is at page 583, and a memo from the Committee for Justice is in table papers at page 10. The Justice Committee have sought further information on the PSNI schedule. The memo from the Committee for Justice states that given that the time frame for the end of the statutory period will expire before that information is received, and in noting that the schedule is a live document that can be updated to reflect legislative or policy changes, the committee agreed at their meeting on the 19th of June that it had no objection to the PSNI detention and disposal schedule. The deadline for this committee to consider these schedules is 30th of June. So I suppose I want to say in general terms, I think it's important that committees get all the information they need, and these are important decisions and ones that we want to ensure are based on very strong information. So I suppose I want to note that. I note also that the Justice Committee have said they're content, but it's worth mentioning. So any other comments, members, or are members content to approve it? Content. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 12 is the Forward Work Programme, members, a copy of which is at page 667. Do members have any comments, or are they content to note the Forward Work Programme?
Could I just ask, obviously with the Minister next week, how much time do we have with him? Do we know, is it an hour or?
Looking at Charlie.
Can I just come back to you?
Yeah,
Sorry, apologies. I'll come back. Clarify that.
And how are we going to organise ourselves for that then?
We'll probably look at themes again. I think if members are content, and we can get a quick discussion before next week on the themes. But I think themes thematically would probably move us through more logically and
maybe useful if we get back just a copy of what we've sent in as the questions for the Minister to consider, just so we have those in front
We'll
of us.
recirculate that.
And if we can be here in good time next week, then maybe we can take a few minutes and just go over and make sure that everybody's covered with what they want to cover. Okay? Okay, members. Otherwise content with the forward work programme? Yep. Agenda item 13, any other business. Just to flag to members that the Minister is up at question time on Monday, and next Tuesday we'll see the second stage of the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill, Clause 12 of which addresses investigation of housing association tenancy fraud. So I'm just flagging that to members.
Yeah, thank you.
The other item that I want to flag is that the team have sent out an invitation from the Minister to a reception for the NI World Transplant Games team, who are competing in the World Transplant Games in Dresden in August. And location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 3rd of July 2025 in room 29. The Minister, as we've discussed, will be in attendance, and we will also be receiving a briefing from the Department on the June monitoring round following the Minister. So the meeting is now adjourned, members, and I'll ask the Clerk to take us out of broadcast. Thank you.
Senate Chamber. Sound. Senate Chamber. Sound.